Welcome to this week's edition of The World Unraveled with Brandon Kinnig, where we unravel global chaos together. As your humble host, I'm happy to join you this Saturday. I actually just returned from a protest here locally in the Kansas City area, in my suburb nearby, and happened to be passing by, decided to park, walk my dog over, and join the good people who care about what's happening and wanted to protest the dismantling of their government, the takeover by Elon Musk, and all of the chaos we've seen since then. And there were about 50 people, and this was at a fairly busy intersection near an interstate. For those of you that are in Kansas City, I-435 and Mauer Road in Lenexa. And it was very encouraging because we received a lot of honking and thumbs up and support. There were only, I counted, three detractors the entire time that I was there, which was a good 30 to 40 minutes. And I expect we'll see a lot more of this. I spoke with the organizer, and he and his wife is a nurse. He is retired. They organically decided to do something and got a list of their friends together and have gradually put this online and started signing more people up. They had a makeshift clipboard where they were taking names and phone number and email addresses down to keep people updated on the continual protest, because this is going to happen every Saturday. There also was a larger March for Democracy here in Kansas City, downtown, 13th and Grand, over to our World War I memorial, formerly known as the Liberty Memorial. But it was very intriguing to see this and know this wasn't paid Democratic staffers. This wasn't AstroTurf. These were local citizens who wanted to speak out and to do something to demonstrate their opposition to what's happening. And like I said, it was small. It was 50 people, but this is also the very first one, and they're planning to do this every Saturday uh, for indefinitely at this point. So I'll be eager to see and watch how it grows. So much to talk about this week, and there's so much I still want to talk about, but I do want to focus on Signalgate, because the revelation from Jeffrey Goldberg, the publisher of The Atlantic, earlier this week, that he had been accidentally included on a top secret signal chat where members of the administration were conducting war plans for dropping bombs on Yemen, on the Houthi rebels specifically in Yemen, who have, for the last 3 to 4 years now, have been agitators, causing disruptions in global trade, particularly in near the Arabian Gulf and in other parts of the world. So this military action, though, included the vice president, included the national security advisor, Mike Waltz, included director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. Multiple people were included. The Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who was partially organizing this. And it was incredible to watch Jeffrey Goldberg detail how he was inadvertently added to this group. And then as he watched, as he was able to read the details minute by minute for the drone strikes and the missile strikes. And that part was surreal. There's many parts of this that are surreal. The fact that this would be conducted on a commercially available app, which I have used. I actually do use Signal currently and have used it many times, and it is encrypted, but I'm also under no, I'm not naive enough to think that that encryption is foolproof, or that that app still can't be hacked, which it can. Yes, it's more secure than using text messaging or Facebook Messenger or any number of messaging apps. It's a little bit more difficult to hack and to read the contents of a Signal chat, but it's not impossible. And in fact, it's the Pentagon itself had put out a security directive to DoD officials, warning them against using Signal chats and using the app for sensitive conversations and the sharing of classified information. So the fact that senior American officials were using this app not even to coordinate meeting scheduling or logistical information, what you would consider administrative duties, but to share some of the most classified, highly sensitive information possible on real time military operations with multiple people included. And not only that, you had Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, who not only inadvertently included the publisher of the Atlantic, but at no time did he or anybody else realize that this person was in the group. This is incompetence on a scale and magnitude that we haven't seen before. And it's incredibly hypocritical, especially in light of the nonstop coverage about Hillary's emails and using the private server, which was a huge security vulnerability and risk and should have never happened. But the fact was, you were talking in most cases about details and information regarding events that had already occurred retroactively, still highly sensitive, in some cases classified, versus what we saw here, which was a real time military operation that was done on a commercially available app with a member of the media included, unbeknownst to anybody else. And the fact was, if this had been hacked or if other people had been inadvertently included on the chat, it could have had dangerous repercussions for our military men and women, particularly since we were providing coordinates, dates, times, specific locations of when bombs were going to be dropped and when attack fighter jets were going to launch and when strike drones were going to reach their intended targets. I mean, this is serious. I mean, we could have not only compromised the whole mission, but we put American lives at risk. Not only that, Steve Witkoff, who is the special envoy to Russia during the Ukrainian negotiations, he happened to be in Moscow during the this chat. So he not only was in the United States, he was in a foreign country and in a hostile foreign country at that. And you don't think that Kremlin was monitoring his activities or had tapped into his Signal chat? It's just so multiple levels of incompetence, screw up, and at no point during this entire conversation did anybody in the group realize that Goldberg had been added. And Goldberg actually removed himself from the group after all this was done, and still nobody even realized that he had been included or that he had just left the group, which I don't understand because it's very, very easy if you're in a Signal chat to see who's included in the group. You are able to see if somebody leaves the group, if somebody joins. Uh, So clearly, we're talking about people who don't know how to use modern technology very well at all, nor do they apparently pay attention to detail. Number two, uh, but we would also be naive to think this wasn't the first time that they had conducted this type of sensitive operation via Signal chat. This was the time they got caught because they included a member of the press. But what if, I assume they've done this multiple times already in those, 8 weeks that the administration has been in office. And how do we know that they haven't included others that Mike Waltz hasn't accidentally added somebody else in his phone book and list of contacts into the chat. Maybe another member of the media, maybe a member of the foreign media, someone who's with RT, the Russian state-sponsored news agency, or with a Chinese ambassador or somebody. We don't know. And that's what's so alarming about this. The only reason we know is because they happened to get caught, because the person they did include was Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, who is somebody who wasn't going to be a shill for them or cover for them in any way. So that is very alarming. Plus, this is just complete laziness. If you're a senior military official or national security official, your home is outfitted with communications devices specifically for chats involving classified information and highly sensitive information. You have a special office setup with a special secure phone line, a special secure computer. And this was something that Olivia Troy, who was a former national security advisor for Mike Pence in the first Trump administration, spoke about when she was on one of the podcasts earlier this week. I think it was the one with Tim Miller. And she mentioned just how we're in bizarro upside down land because when she was in a national security role, she was actually running late trying to get to the White House, and she used her personal computer to essentially just print a meeting agenda for a highly sensitive national security related meeting. And her actions were being monitored, and she immediately got a phone call because it was noticed and observed that she had printed out that agenda on a personal computer, and she was admonished, and she quickly apologized, was very embarrassed, promised not to do it again. Nothing like that ever happened again. And this was even with sensitive information. This was with uh, meeting logistics. So for there to be that level of understanding, um, when it came to it involves a mid-level national security staffer, why wouldn't the highest ranking officials in the land be held accountable for conducting one of the most sensitive discussions involving a real-time live military operation? It just boggles the mind. But what I was saying earlier is that all of these people have these special offices outfitted in their homes. They're called skiffs, and this is done at taxpayer expense, but it allows them to be able to make um, secure phone calls from home, to be online and exchange secure information from home through a secure network, secure equipment, without having that information compromised through commercial networks. Now, gradually, even with that setup, it's still a little bit tedious because you have to be home to use it, and you have to, go to that secure area and log in, and there's a whole process and procedure. But we're talking about secure discussions. There should be that acknowledgement that it's going to take a few extra minutes of time, and it's going to involve, just a little bit more forethought than, just immediately getting on your personal phone. And the fact that these officials chose to disregard that equipment and that setup that they're given with these skiffs at taxpayer expense, and that they were going to conduct this all on ostensibly personal cell phones. The other thing was that during the hearings this week, their messaging was all out of whack. You had the national security advisor, Mike Waltz, who testified along with John Ratcliffe, who's the um, head of the CIA, and Tulsi Gabbard, and they refused. They wouldn't admit that this was a classified discussion that involved classified information, but at the same time, when pressed on whether they would be comfortable having those conversations released to the public, demurred. They refused to say that they would be fine with it. They were clearly trying to have it both ways. And Tulsi Gabbard wouldn't even acknowledge or answer whether she had used her own personal phone or not, which makes it clear to me that she was using her personal phone, and likely most of these officials were using their personal devices in this capacity. But it was just I mean, gross incompetence and very uh, embarrassing, but also completely dangerous. And under any prior administration, we would expect there to be consequences for this. I mean, could you imagine former secretaries of defense such as Robert Gates, who served under George W. Bush and Obama, and Jim Mattis, who served in the first Trump administration? Could you imagine either of them making similar mistakes or participating in going along with this type of unsecure um, cat? It's just it's despicable. And Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, should resign, as well as the National Security Advisor should resign. And really, I think the DNI, Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, should resign over this. All three of them should resign. It's a complete dereliction of duty. The other thing is there was actually an intelligence agent whose name was mentioned during these conversations, and it kept off the record by Jeffrey Goldberg. But to claim that these weren't highly classified, as Pete Hegseth said, I mean that's just ridiculous. It's absurd. It's you would have to expect people to be stupid to believe that. But we know that's not the case. And I think to Jeffrey Goldberg's credit, he wasn't going to release the full conversations, but because the administration chose to attack him, as the whistleblower, when he did nothing wrong, he was the one who was inadvertently added to this. And then you had the National Security Advisor making comments that, disparaging Jeffrey Goldberg's character and claiming somehow that he forced himself into the conversation, into the chat, and then somehow he added himself to uh, Waltz's contact list and his cell phone's phone book. I mean, just absurdity because he won't take responsibility and accountability for what happened. But that's what prompted, I think, Jeffrey Goldberg to say, "Hey, I'm just going to release everything," and only redacting, the name of the intelligence agent, and ensuring that was released. The White House continued the charade by Caroline Levitt, who's the White House I'm sorry, uh, press secretary, propaganda secretary, press secretary, same thing in this White House. She basically tried to differentiate and say that these weren't war plans, these were attack plans. Again, I think what is the meaning of the word is? I mean, that's basically, what the administration is trying to do here. They're trying to nitpick and verbally challenge the nature of the conversation. But other people, such as the Senate Armed Services Committee Chair Roger Wicker, who's a Republican from Mississippi, um, in the Senate, basically said that this appears to be sensitive, and he would have wanted it classified. So Wicker and Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, who's the top-ranking Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, um, they want an inspector general report on the security lapse and they want a briefing. Hopefully, we'll get some type of investigation. I'm not very hopeful at all that the Department of Justice will do anything. Pam Bondi, who's Trump's handpicked sycophant for attorney general, already came out and said that she doesn't believe the information was classified. It doesn't warrant any type of investigation. She is also basically um, engaged in whataboutism and immediately started talking about Hillary's emails and about Joe Biden. having classified documents, trying to compare those situations to this, which are not analogous at all. You have to remember the only reason Pam Bondi has this job is because she essentially promised that she would be Trump's attorney and that the DOJ would operate as a de facto extension of Trump's personal whims and wishes rather than representing the United States, the people of the United States. So she is playing true to form. And you have to remember back when she was AG in Florida, at one point, Pam Bondi, early on in the first Trump term, was going to open an investigation into Trump University and into the very real and legitimate claims of fraud that had been leveled by people who had been duped into that fake program. And the Trump people got to her pretty quickly and said, "You don't want to do this. If you care about your career and you care about becoming a larger political player, you need to drop this investigation." And she dropped it quick, like a hot potato. And ever since then, she has been very servile to Donald Trump and essentially has been, his loyal foot soldier, and that's what she'll continue to do at DOJ. But again, it is remarkable and it's a break with norms because let's not forget that it was Merrick Garland, who was Biden's own attorney general, who opened an investigation into Biden for the classified documents that were in his garage, which dated back to his time as a U.S. senator, actually, and serving on the various committees. And, you have prior instances of attorney generals approving special counsels. It was, during Obama's presidency that the FBI and the DOJ opened up an investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails. And, she was a Democrat serving during a Democratic administration. You can go back even prior to that, not as similar a situation, but when Alberto Gonzales served as George W. Bush's second attorney general after John Ashcroft, there was a scandal involving the firing of several U.S. attorneys. Kind of similar what happened now. Trump fired all of the U.S. attorneys. That isn't what happened with George W. Bush. There were a handful of them that were fired, but because of the way it happened and because of the backlash, you actually had Alberto Gonzales as the attorney general accept responsibility, and he resigned, which is inconceivable in this administration because nobody takes responsibility or for anything, and nobody would resign. And this is a much bigger disgrace. The other problem here is that under normal circumstances, the DoD Inspector General would have immediately initiated an investigation into this because every agency typically has an Inspector General in place who has independent authority to conduct investigations, ensure efficient and correct use of resources and government devices. But that is not what happened here because guess what? Trump fired all of the inspector generals in his first 30 days in office. And that's currently being litigated in the courts in terms of trying to get them their jobs back. Because again, they shouldn't have been fired. They were put in place by Congress. Trump doesn't technically have the authority to fire them, but he did anyway. And as we have seen, Trump acts with impunity when it comes to these issues. But all of that said, the incompetence, the with doing this in the first place using a commercially available app, the question is how many times, what I want to know with investigation, how many times has sensitive information or classified information been shared during in this manner on Signal since the beginning of the administration? Uh, we need a thorough audit if to see if any of those messages have survived, to understand if there was anybody else who was inadvertently included on these chats, who made the ultimate call to use the platform to share this information, because the buck stops with that person. And even though the buck stops with that person, as I said, regardless, Secretary of Defense, national intelligence director, national security advisor should all be fired. Heads should roll over this because this is such an egregious national security lapse. But we want to know how long this has gone on, when did it start, and do an audit for those messages that still exist, to understand if who else may have inadvertently been included in past conversations. Uh, the other thing to remember here is that multiple laws were likely broken, one of which includes the Foreign Espionage Act, because of the ability of foreign hostile actors to tap into these conversations. And like I said, um, Witkoff, the special envoy who was participating in the Signal chat, was in Moscow at the time and almost assuredly would have had his device compromised. And also, we have very clear laws on public records retention when it comes to presidential administrations. Everything is supposed to be retained for the public record. It goes to the National Archives. We know how Trump feels about that. During his first term, he flushed conversations and documents down the White House toilets because he didn't want them preserved for posterity. And he replaced the National Archives director recently because of his personal vendetta of the National Archives trying to retrieve the documents that he stole and kept in Mar-a-Lago. But all that said, with Signal chats, you can set messages to expire as soon as 7 days post message. So that alone is a huge vulnerability to the requirements of the law to keep these messages permanently. So you have several laws regarding espionage and national security that were violated, and likely the laws on records retention. And that's not even to also speak to the fact that um, the conversations themselves were just juvenile. I mean, these can't imagine, again, prior administration officials and past administrations using emojis. "Oh, America, yes, let's pray over this." And in the way that they talked about Europe, so dismissively, not wanting to, to defend Europe, talking about them, taking United States for granted and re- basically relying on us for too much. I mean, the conversations themselves leading up to the actual drone attacks and missile strikes themselves were just incredibly um, stupid and uh, juvenile. I mean, that's really the word I keep coming back to. But they also reflected badly on us, and they're all public now because of this debacle. But I think it also reflects on poor leadership that doesn't understand America's role in the world, doesn't understand its role as a leader, why we were meant to, um, you know, protect trade routes, be that leader of the free world, assist our allies. Um, it's um, remarkable to just kind of read those conversations in real time. And if you get a chance, go back and read them and everything that's been released because you can see it all. And it's pathetic and reflects poorly on us. But also, like if anybody else had done this, a low level staffer, a Marine, an Army Ranger, they would most assuredly be prosecuted and face jail time. I think I think it was 2 years ago, maybe it was three. Um, the there was a I'm trying to remember if it was a merchant marine um, who was prosecuted. Uh, the Jack Kiera. So he was the 22-year-old. Um, in case you don't remember this story, Massachusetts Air National Guardsman, actually a tech support member, who was prosecuted for one of the most secure leaks of classified information in U.S. history. And the leaks themselves occurred in 2022, around the time of the invasion of Ukraine and the beginning of the Russian war against Ukraine. And he released a lot of information regarding that, regarding the United States involvement in the pressure campaign against Russia. And he had leaked more than 40 highly classified military documents to fellow video game players on the network Discord. And he was um, charged in 2023, and he's looking at more than 16 years in jail for his crimes. But again, if we're going to prosecute a 22-year-old guardsman for leaking classified information, but we're not going to prosecute any of these high-level officials, then what are we doing? Why even have the rule of law? Because it doesn't apply, apparently. And if this, if a real-time military strike information is it considered classified information, then what is? Then nothing is classified. Why not just publish the details of the president's national security briefing that he has daily, and you put that out there online, or have that conducted over Signal, or uh, live stream it on X. I don't know. I mean, if we're going to be this flippant as a society when it comes to um, national security information, you know, we I mean, we don't deserve to, have anything classified. Just put it all out there for consumption. I mean, that's basically what the administration is saying by saying this is no big deal, and doesn't really matter at all. Um, but it's also interesting to see that there are members of the military who are responding to this. And as you would expect, they're pretty pissed about all this, because they know that if they were involved, they would be held accountable. And frankly, this is conduct that endangers all of them. Uh, so it's also been interesting to see the members of the House and Senate, most of whom have been Democrats at this point, who served in the military, like Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, who was an Army pilot, who was nearly killed in Iraq and survived with numerous injuries, uh, speak out about this. And if anybody is qualified to speak out on something like this, it would be somebody like Tammy Duckworth, who actually lost both of her legs in Iraq, and then doesn't even have any mobility in her uh, right arm. So she lives with the consequences of her service to the United States on a daily basis. And she's called on Pete Hegseth to resign immediately, said he's a disgrace. Um, she used much more colorful language than I'm going to use on here. Uh, but I've also heard similar people um, say, uh, make similar statements online. Um, and so I think that's also notable, particularly people who serve in the military. The other thing that was very striking, because this is a story that is not going away and continues to spiral, the German newspaper Der Spiegel revealed the contact information for many of these officials who are on the Signal chat is available online. Email addresses, passwords to their private accounts, which makes it very easy for hackers to get into their personal devices. So you're talking about a scenario where even if hackers don't hack directly into the Signal chat conversation, they can easily hack into many of these officials' private cell phones, have full control over their cell device, geolocation, apps that they have, and immediately then open Signal and see the entire contents of the conversation prior to bombs being dropped in Yemen. This is also very dangerous from the standpoint of how these officials could be compromised and the potential for uh, bribery and the potential for um, very damaging information to be used against many of these officials, especially when we're talking about their personal devices. If someone can easily obtain the passwords online and hack into their phones, that's immediately something I thought of as critical. And we're talking about people that could easily be compromised. We're talking about people who, Pete Hegseth, who's a serial adulterer, alcoholic, um, sexual assaulter, people like uh, Tulsi Gabbard, who I don't know if she's on the payroll for the Russians or not, but she's been a propaganda mouthpiece for um, Syria's President al-Assad and for Putin, and she also has a lot of um, compromising information regarding her embrace of a very cultish-like religion. So there's a lot there that can be used against these people, and so the fact that all of this was easily out there um, is not only reckless, but then to go ahead and use these personal devices after they're compromised um, for a national security operation, it's mind blowing and staggering. But I wanted to find some of the statements because the military um, .com. Military is the leading news website for service members, veterans, families of service members, both active duty and retired. They're not happy about this. Uh, they the military journal actually had a story titled "Different Spanks for Different Ranks," and they talked about how Hegseth's scandal had put regular troops in the brig, and that the story had angered and bewildered fighter pilots who say they can't be certain that the Pentagon is going to be focused on their safety when they strap into cockpits. And so there's a lot of understandable outrage at this. And Israel is apparently very upset with us now, too, because NSC advisor Mike Waltz, the guy who inadvertently, without ever figuring it out, included um, Jeffrey Goldberg on this conversation and then tried to blame him for it. Uh, so he actually, during the chat thread on the Yemeni strikes, identified a Houthi missile expert whose identity Israel had provided directly from a human source in Yemen. And so Israel is now extremely upset about this because that missile expert is in jeopardy and probably in danger, as well as the Yemeni human source that provided that expert. That individual is probably in danger. So you have two sources, um, highly confidential intelligence sources, whose identities have now been compromised and who could very much lose their lives over this. And what message does that send to anybody who wants to cooperate with the United States? If that's Israel, I'm not sharing information with US officials because they're bumbling imbeciles. And if you're in the field and you're asked to share information with either the US or an ally, why would you risk your life or career knowing that this is how inept they are? You wouldn't in that case. Um, so yeah, I mean it's just all around bad. There has been some question on public reaction to this and how long it'll stay in the news cycle. We don't expect a DOJ investigation. We don't expect independent or special counsel being appointed. The most we can hope for is like a joint Senate investigation. Because nothing will come from the House either, which is just, so in the tank under Mike Johnson for Republicans and for Trump specifically. But it is interesting if you look at the polling so far on these issues. So YouGov and CNN polling both showed Compare this to prior scandals involving national security lapses. And so in their prior polling involving the classified documents in Biden's garage, which Biden fully cooperated with and returned, unlike Trump, 30 to 39% of Americans labeled that very serious. Clinton's emails, 30 to 43% of Americans labeled that very serious security breach. Trump's classified docs scandal in Mar-a-Lago, which involved classified docs he had as president, unlike the classified docs that Biden had in his garage as a senator, 42 to 49% thought that was very serious. And now the Signal chat leak, 53% of Americans find this to be very serious. So that is far higher than the same percentage of Americans that found fault with the classified docs scandal under Biden, Clinton's emails, or Trump's own classified docs, which tells me that this has staying power. The other interesting thing out of this YouGov survey, which was taken on March 25th, was that 60% of Republicans say that it's a very or somewhat serious problem that Trump officials shared military plans with a journalist in a chat app. If you the breakdown, um, and so that's how you get to that 53% of total Americans number. So you have 89% of Democrats that think this is somewhat serious or very serious. You have 72% of independents that think it's serious or somewhat serious, and then 60% of Republicans. So this has broken through in a way that virtually no other scandal has, particularly with Republicans who have tended to remain in lockstep around 90% in support of Trump on any given issue, whether that would be Elon Musk involvement in the federal government, which overall is very unpopular, but with Republicans is popular, or whether that's with the dismantling of many of these agencies like USAID or Department of Ed or the Trump administration immigration policy. 60% of Republicans saying that this is a serious issue. This is not something that Trump will be able to continue to ignore. And there's already speculation talk that JD Vance is going to try to have is trying pushing for to fire Mike Waltz and just make him the fall guy. Will that be enough to uh, to end the bloodletting and get this out of the news cycle? I'm not sure because there's still so much we don't know about how long this has gone on and what other clues are going to drop in terms of other potential national security lapses. We don't know yet. So that has been the main news of the week. But that's not all that's happened this week. I do want to pivot um, just very quickly to our neighbor to the north, Canada, because we're uh, next week, the on again, off again tariffs war, which is decimating the US economy. So I'm recording on Saturday, and yesterday, Friday, March 28th, stocks plunged again. The markets took a nosedive. It was the worst performance in more than 2 years for the markets. Inflation is surging. There's been no control over that, no end in sight. And amidst all of this, Trump thinks it's time to resurrect tariffs again against our Canadian neighbors and against others. This time with 25% tariffs on foreign made cars. Where does that get applied? I mean, most foreign OEMs, manufacturers of automobiles, have some factories in the United States. Although, there's a mix of materials used, and those raw materials come from everywhere. So, how do you determine and place a tariff when you have an automobile with parts and components that, some of which are made in the United States, some of which come from abroad? Like, I can't even begin to figure out the complexity of where and how you would apply that tariff. But what that does mean is that automotive prices are going to go up drastically. Um, and even for companies like Tesla, which have most of their domestic factory production in the United States, it's still going to hurt them at a time when they can't really afford to be hurt, when their sales are down double digits in the US and throughout the rest of the globe in places like Australia and Germany down by anywhere from 37% to 50%, with their stock down by almost 40% so far this year. But that's the take that Trump is taking. But what's been most intriguing is that Canadians face an election in April with Justin Trudeau stepping down from being prime minister, and having Mark Carney step up. So Mark Carney, um, as of today, has only been prime minister for 17 days, and he has called for a general election to be held on April 28th. Which, by the way, can I just say, I love these countries that do these snap elections where they're like, okay, we're only going to have a month of campaign. This is how it's going to be. I would love for us to have that type of system rather than having 2-year elections leading up to the presidency, or really the same for Congress. It's actually more than 2 years for the presidency. Those elections start basically 3 years in advance, where you have this never-ending onslaught of TV ads and online ads and campaign stops. It gets to be so intrusive and so nauseating and turns so many Americans off. Canada has a snap election on April 28th. The Liberals have been unpopular. They had been in power now, for the better part of, I think, over 10 years. And Justin Trudeau's popularity was plummeting, which is why he departed, and had become a foregone conclusion that the Conservative Party, um, which is led by Pierre Poilievre, butcher that name, it's a French name, that they were going to win this election because the Liberals were down by double digits in polling. But since Trump actually came into office and instigated his trade war against Canada, the Liberals have regained popularity and they're now polling even with the Conservatives. So they've regained all of that lost momentum in the polls, namely because they've been seen as the aggressive bulwark to Trump and they've been taking him head on so much now that the conservative candidate for prime minister is saying, hey, I am going to be stronger against Trump than the liberals are. I won't be pushed around. I'm going to stand up for Canada. I'm going to stand up for our economy. I will be strongest against Trump. And you don't want to elect the liberals because, they're going to get pushed around and I won't. So it's been ironic and odd to see both parties are now fighting about who's going to be toughest on Trump. But if the liberals pull this off and they win again, and expand their governance of Canada under new leadership this time, it'll be entirely because of Trump, essentially. Trump will be handing them a gift between his attacks on Canadians, starting the tariff war, to uh, his insistence on making Canada the 51st state. Canadians are pissed, and rightfully so. And they seem to be turning back to the liberals just because the liberals seem to be the boogeyman for Trump. And now the conservatives are trying to stem those losses, but they can't ditch Trump fast enough. But also, I think it helps that it'll be interesting to watch too. Mark Carney, um, who's now the standard bearer for the Liberal Party, he's a political novice, but he's a relative centrist, has a long career in central banking and finance. He's the former governor of the Bank of Canada. So he has economic and finance experience, which will play very well in a head-to-head tariff war against the Trump administration. So I would say that he probably has the likely edge here because he's not a firebrand, because he has the financial and economics background, which Canadians want at this time. And so, again, predictions are made all the time. But if I had to predict today, I think he's going to win the race. I don't think that would have been the case if Trudeau had still been in office or if one of Trudeau's deputies had just won, like a kind of a standard career bureaucrat. So I do think that having someone who's relatively new to politics, not a bureaucrat, but cares about Canada, fiscally minded. I think that makes a difference. It's also interesting too, because the Canadian Prime Minister just this week said our relationship with the United States is over. We're entering a new era. He waxed nostalgic about the time when Canada and America were closely intertwined from the standpoint of trade, national security, some of which is still in place through the Five Eyes intelligence sharing, but that probably won't be in place for very long. And he spoke about this close bond between our two democracies, who are literally next door neighbors, but about how that's a thing of the past now. And Americans and Canadians have to realize that for the foreseeable future in this new Trump era, um, that relationship will no longer exist. That's also a striking realization and a reminder that the post World War II international order is officially dead. But watch to see how both candidates campaign leading up to the April 28th election. I think that's going to be key. And it'll be interesting to see how much Trump's stupidity impacts liberal fortunes in a race that liberals were and should have likely lost and may now actually win. Lastly, next Tuesday there's some very critical races. There are two special congressional races in Florida, one of which is to fill Matt Gaetz' seat, and that would be the likely the harder one for Democrats to win. But the other one is to fill Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor's seat. And Josh Will, who's a school teacher who's running for that seat, is within 5 points of uh, the Republican who's running in that race in the national polling. And the Republican who's running was lazy and complacent and just assumed he had this in the bag because this is a plus 30 Trump district. And so he hasn't campaigned at all. And we, Josh has really the pavement and done a lot of get out the vote. But that's within 5 points now. So if there is going to be an upset, I'm very uh, bearish when it comes to Florida, just knowing they continue to disappoint. But if there was to be an upset in any race, it's going to be that. It's going to be in the Waltz race out of the handful of special elections, 3 elections that are being held on the congressional side there. And lastly, next Tuesday is the Supreme Court election in Wisconsin, state Supreme Court, which will impact the balance of the court, whether liberals or conservatives have power. That is why Elon Musk has spent over $20 million there now and has resurrected his vote buying scheme, giving away $1 million uh, to people who vote and to show up to his rallies. Although the Wisconsin Attorney General is suing him and trying to get that stopped, we'll see what happens with that. But this is an active election Elon Musk is trying to buy for multiple reasons. He's trying to showcase his power and particularly his unlimited money and try to stop momentum, especially on the Democratic side, from using this as a referendum on the, um, you know, 60 to 80 days in the Trump administration so far. But also, there's some personal fortune finance attached to this. Tesla isn't allowed to sell in Wisconsin because Wisconsin has a state law that the state Supreme Court has upheld so far that says that um, OEMs, automotive manufacturers, that also cannot operate dealerships. And that's essentially what Tesla does. It's a very different model. There are no franchises. They don't have independent dealers that sell their vehicles. And so Tesla is a corporate entity. They have their own manufacturing facilities as well as dealerships. But because of that law, they can't sell via dealership in Wisconsin. And they want to change the makeup of the court so that they're able to do that because there will likely be a court ruling on this in the very near future as Tesla is actively suing them for this. So there's a direct conflict of interest between the shadow president and his businesses with Wisconsin. And there's also, he just wants to extend his um, reputation and throw around some money to show that he still has impact and power, and that people aren't actually rejecting Trump's agenda. But this is also going to have immense ramifications for redistricting. So the liberal majority just last year, which came into power just 2 years ago, redrew the congressional districts. I'm sorry, redrew the legislative districts to be more fair and reflect and get rid of the gerrymandering and reflect the actual total raw vote. They haven't done that yet with the congressional districts. But based on the total vote that comes out of Wisconsin, um, their congressional delegations should be split about half and half between Democrats and Republicans. But in reality, it's the districts are so badly gerrymandered. It's one of the most gerrymandered states in the country. They actually have eight, and only two of those eight members of Congress are Democrats. And it really should be about four Democrats and four Republicans. So that's something that could change coming out of this Supreme Court race. Just so you know, the Republican taken unlimited money from Elon Musk, has appeared at rallies with him, has basically welcomed and embraced his complete involvement in the race. Um, his name is Brad Schimmel. The Democrat running liberal is Susan Crawford. Now, technically, these candidates run nonpartisan with no party label, but in reality, parties endorse and embrace candidates in these races. And they have immense power. And if you want to think from, beyond just redistricting and balance of power in Washington versus in Congress and in the state house, um, how these justices can influence Wisconsin power. Most notably in 2020, the state Supreme Court, by one vote, um, basically smacked down a lawsuit to invalidate uh, Joe Biden's win in the state. And so, if there had been one more Republican vote on the court, they would have likely said Joe Biden's win didn't count and thrown the election in disarray, resulting in a constitutional crisis, or maybe thrown it to the Wisconsin State Assembly to then put forward their own electors, in contrast to the actual popular vote of the state, which Biden had won. So that's why this is important too, in terms of um, election integrity and having fair and free elections and ensuring that the election results are upheld. So keep that race on your radar. So very key, very important races to watch next Tuesday as well. So much more to talk about. I do want to talk in my next episode coming with the next few days about the very disturbing trend we've seen with ICE arrests and detainments and what that means for emboldened Trump when it comes to his court battles and the judges that are trying to rein him in. More on that to come. But for now, I just want to say until next time, keep your mind open, your sources checked, and keep unraveling the chaos of the world. We'll do it together. See you next time. Thank you.